My name is Jen Pekoski. I am a program officer with the Alliance, and I'm very glad to welcome you to this session. I do want to start with a land acknowledgement. I am located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wuk, and Chinooktung nations on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. As we move to the proceedings of our session today, it is with acknowledgement of the First Nations, Inuit and Métis nations, and communities who have been harmed by colonial and unethical research, and of the data sovereignty and research priorities of these nations and communities. We commit to understanding and taking up the Alliance's role in reducing harm and advancing reconciliation in research. Thank you. The Digital Research Alliance of Canada, the Alliance, it has launched a call for participation as a partner organization and a call for proposals for the funding opportunity for the Controlled Access Management for Research Data Initiative, CAM. The purpose of this session today is to share with the community information around this project and its various aspects in detail, and to share information and guidance around the process of this call. Apologies, everyone. I'm having a slide moment. Thank you for your patience. So we do have a code of conduct the Alliance uses, and this does guide our gathering today. If you have attended Alliance sessions before, you may be familiar with this. The Alliance does seek to provide a welcoming, engaging, and safe community for everyone, where discriminatory language is not appropriate in any venue or platform, and the Alliance does not tolerate harassment in any form. Harassment is understood as any behavior that threatens another person or group or produces an unsafe environment. So thank you for being here together to engage, to listen, and learn. This is our agenda. First, Victoria Smith will provide an overview of the CAM project. Then I will provide some core information on the call process from a program management and administration perspective. After this presentation, we will open for questions. We are holding questions to this time, so you can use the Q&A box in the Zoom to enter questions that you have during the presentation. There is a chat window as well, if you do want to engage that way. And we do encourage questions in the Q&A box. Thank you. So Victoria, thank you for being here. I'm going to turn the session over to you now.
So thank you so much, Jen. And just to confirm, maybe from a thumbs up from you, Jen, that you can hear me loud and clear. Fantastic. So it's my absolute pleasure to be here today. My name is Victoria Smith, and I am the initiative lead for the Controlled Access Management for Research Data Initiative. And I'm the Policy, Privacy, and Sensitive Data Coordinator at the Alliance. Next slide, please, Jen. So what's the context for this project? Researchers are increasingly required or expected to deposit data or to otherwise archive it in the medium or long term for review and or for reuse. There's a lot to unpack there. We know that these requirements are coming from sponsors and from publishers and from other policy setters in the research ecosystem. And we know that requirements for retaining data for review might be different than retaining it to make it available for future use and so on. But in general, there's a movement toward data retention, data stewardship, where we recognize data as an asset that goes beyond the life cycle of an individual project and certainly the project for which it was originally collected. Next slide, please, Jen. So of course, not all research data can be published openly. So of course, there are lots of data where you can simply put them online and you don't need to be too concerned about controlled access because it isn't relevant. But there are many data that require controlled access, and where stewarding data in the medium or long term, or otherwise depositing them or making them available for reuse, isn't an option without having appropriate mechanisms in place to manage controlled access. Next slide, please, Jen. And so the reasons that data might require controlled access vary, and certainly this list is not exhaustive, but data containing sensitive, confidential, proprietary, or embargoed information all might require managing controlled access and might have different requirements for what managing controlled access might look like. Next slide, please. So enter CAM, or the Controlled Access Management for Research Data Initiative. We're looking to support researchers, research data repositories, and research institutions and organizations, and that's conceived fairly broadly as organizations that have an interest or a mandate related to research, not just post-secondary institutions, but this broad group of partners with managing controlled access to research data, recognizing that each one of these groups plays important and critical roles in how data are created and used and repurposed for research and reaccessed for research purposes down the road. So what we're looking to do in supporting this group with managing controlled access is some goals on a number of different fronts. So that includes enhancing security options for existing research data, enabling data discovery where opportunities to publish metadata or otherwise make data that aren't publicly available, but which may be available through a controlled access mechanism, enabling the discovery of those data on a larger scale, and facilitating safe, appropriate, controlled, and managed data access where appropriate. All right, next slide, please, Jen. So the partner organizations that we are welcoming to join us in this initiative include research data repositories, research institutions or post-secondary, so universities, colleges, organizations that are in the publicly funded research space, and organizations with a research mandate or research interest, and that's quite a broad group, we think. All right, next slide, please. There are three key components to the CAM initiative. So recognizing that controlling and managing controlled access to research data is a complex endeavor that takes place in a number of different fronts, there are three key components to supporting the management of controlled access within this project. The first is technology. You need to have the right infrastructure in place or the right technology in place to support the stewardship of controlled access data. So that might be secure environments or software that supports various activities like user authentication or encryption and so on. So technology is a bedrock of this project and a critical component of the work. We need appropriate technological solutions that allow for compliance and allow for best practices related to managing controlled access. So in the context of this project, we are going to be testing various types of technology, we hope, for repository environments or for stewarding data more broadly, specifically in a research context. Next slide, please. So you might have fantastic technology, but if you don't have workflows that enable the use of that technology, we're still stuck at square one. So there are many workflows that might be related to managing controlled access to sensitive data. And of course, there are many types of sensitive data that might require controlled access. So these workflows can include, but aren't limited to, and don't necessarily include, but often do, research ethics review, privacy impact assessments, research contract negotiation, adherence to local IT requirements or research security policies, and a variety of other mechanisms that happen often within institutions, but sometimes outside institutions, that may relate to various regulatory requirements or local policies or best practices at the discipline level, the institution level, or the regional or provincial level. So this is a really broad category. And so if you're looking at the slide and looking at the terms that we've got for this category, especially harmonized, you might be thinking that's a tall order, and absolutely it is. But what we want to do is create a forum, create an environment where we're able to collaborate with folks on the workflows related to controlling, to managing controlled access, and to harmonize where possible and where appropriate and where feasible, and to innovate where possible or where appropriate or where feasible. So I'll give you an example. Every ethics application form in the country essentially is going to ask the question, do you plan to share data, yes or no? If yes, say more. Now, we know that some REBs have been updating these documents over the last few years to include more specific questions around data deposit or future or unspecified future use of data. And so we're thrilled to see that, and congratulations to those folks. They're on the cutting edge here, but we know that we're not necessarily optimizing how researchers engage with those sorts of questions on REB forms, or how REBs are supported in terms of assessing those sorts of questions and the answers that they're getting from researchers. So those are the types of innovations that we're talking about in this category, is making sure that those touch points that researchers have with the institution, from the point of funding application through to publication and data stewardship in the medium and long term after a particular project has ended, that we're taking advantage of those touch points, those regulatory oversight points, to really set researchers up for success, to set decision makers in a regulatory context up for success, to have workflows and documentation that accompany workflows that really reflect current requirements and current and emerging best practices around data stewardship. So the old paradigm wherein data are always destroyed, and that's sort of the default option, we think has really ended. And so this pillar of the project, workflows, is about ensuring that research institutions, data repositories, and everybody else are really on the same page, or at least have an opportunity to acknowledge that there might be some pages that we can share. There might be some common ground that we can establish. So certainly we're not going to create some kind of unified national process that suits every discipline or every data type or every service provider. But where there's an opportunity to collaborate, and where there are touch points where we can allow for some harmonization and some innovation, we really want to support that. And we want to make sure that that's linked to the technology piece, so that the advice that researchers are getting from their REBs, from their privacy offices, from their contract offices and others, is really consistent with the service options that are available in the Canadian context. So when a repository says we need this, this, and this, a researcher is confidently able to get that from an institution that's up to date and informed about those repository requirements. So next slide, please, Jen. The third component is resources. So you might have fantastic technology that enables smart, efficient, effective management of controlled access. And you might have workflows within and outside institutions that enable the use of that technology. But if people don't know about it, aren't supported in using it, can't navigate it confidently, don't know how to make decisions around what choices to make or which technologies or workflows to use, we're still kind of stuck. So the last component of the project is around resource development. And this is, again, another broad category where we're looking to identify existing resources in the community that support management of controlled access, and develop new resources where there's a gap, or there are changes that have happened to best practices, where there's an emerging need for new or revised resources in this area. And really, this is about building capacity throughout the ecosystem. We know that researchers want this training and this opportunity, and different ways that they can educate themselves on the services that are available, or the best practices for navigating workflows. But really, it's about sort of building capacity, not just within researchers, but within institutions, so that REBs have resources they can turn to on repository options, that privacy offices have resources they can turn to on standard language and research contracts around data sharing and so on. And we know that a lot of fantastic work is happening within institutions to support this work already. So we want to showcase that work, highlight that work, support that work, and create opportunities to scale it and to harmonize it with similar efforts in other institutions, so that researchers operating in collaborations across the country or across regions or across institutions and so on have more consistency and more clarity in terms of how to approach what can be often very complex issues in a multi-institutional or multi-jurisdictional context. Okay, that's a lot of information. Jen, if you could bring us to the next slide, please. So I'll say a little bit about that first component of the project, technologies. So the way that we designed this project is we anticipate that multiple repositories will be participating and looking to pilot various technologies related to managing controlled access to research data. And we're not looking to be restrictive here. So if you're not a repository per se, but you're a data stewarding organization and you've got technologies, you're a university and you've got technologies that you're looking at, you're considering, that you've been using, the more the merrier. So really what we want to do is create a space where the various solutions that folks are looking to test or implement in this space, there's an opportunity for that alignment and that coordination. Not everything needs to be harmonized or aligned, absolutely, but we want to create an opportunity to do that where it makes sense to do so, sort of create that option. Next slide, please, Jen. But we're hosting this party, so we want to make sure that we're contributing appropriately. So we're bringing some further developed technology to the table, and I'll say a little more about that in the next couple of slides. But this is sort of creating a minimum level of technology that's at play in this project. Certainly, exactly what's on the table will depend on who signs up, who wants to get involved, what they want to test. But at minimum, there are further developed technologies that support sensitive data management in a repository context that we'll be looking to pilot in the context of CAM. Next slide, please, Jen. So just to be very clear, if you are considering signing up as a partner organization, you will have the option to adapt or adopt the further technology that the Alliance is contributing to this initiative. But we anticipate that there will be other technologies that you will be invited to consider piloting or contribute to structuring a pilot test for, contributed by other groups that are similarly looking to implement technological solutions to manage and controlled access. So next slide, please, Jen. So just to give you a little taste of the further technology that the Alliance is contributing to this initiative, it's really a software that's built in a zero encryption model. So what that means, zero encryption model in this context, is that the encrypted data set is stored completely separately from the encryption key. So what I really want you to take away from this diagram is that middle area where the encryption happens, that's happening locally. So of course, one sort of weak point often in these workflows is transferring data to an environment in order to encrypt it. You don't have to do that here. So whatever secure environment your institution has approved for you to be analyzing data in the active context, you can use that environment, you can use this software in that environment to encrypt the data. So there's no moment where you have to transfer an unencrypted data set, and there's risks, of course, that would exist with that transfer. So we've eliminated the need for anything like that. Once you've encrypted that data locally, you can deposit it in Further using the existing workflows. So the idea here is to create a really lightweight system that integrates cleanly into existing workflows. So we're not building a new repository, we're not redesigning Further from the ground up. We're taking the existing workflows, the existing structure of Further and its storage and its deposit workflows, and introducing an added security layer where the data set is encrypted prior to entering the Further system. And I'll draw your attention to the fact that we at Further only ever see the encrypted data set. So we have no access, no insight, no means of gaining access to the encrypted data set. The encryption key is stored entirely separately on Vault servers. So this is just a very quick overview of what the zero encryption model looks like. I'll ask you to go to the next slide, Jen. So the Further software has a number of different features that might be of interest to other research data repositories that want to create their own version of the software, or to researchers or institutions or other folks that steward data. So as I just explained, there's a local encryption of the data prior to deposit, but this also integrates quite nicely with the repository to facilitate data discovery. So the way that it interacts with publishing metadata while maintaining the actual data set itself as encrypted is quite clean and quite nice. There's a user authentication process, so making sure that everybody is who they say they are. Mechanisms for requesting and approving access. So we've created workflows that exist within Further and within the application for users to submit a request, for that request to be adjudicated, revised as needed, retaining all of the history of that exchange. So precisely on what basis was access granted, all of that information is stored, and then ultimately approving access and signing a data access agreement between the parties. And so all of that is handled quite cleanly within the software. And we're really looking forward to pilot testing this with users to find out what changes do we want to make. So we know that we've got a very functional, minimally viable product, but we're looking forward to feedback from researchers and institutions and everybody on campus, from the REB and the privacy office and so on, to make sure that the way that this system has been designed is meeting their needs. So again, partner organizations will be given access to this technology, and we're not just dumping the source code on Git and saying, figure it out. We're creating really robust documentation to accompany that source code so that other groups that steward data, like data repositories, have the option to adapt or adopt a version that makes sense for them. So, really making changes to the app at various levels to ensure that it's meeting their use case appropriately. Next slide, please, Jen. So again, that further technology is not the only thing at the table. Certainly, we're expecting a number of different technologies that will be sort of considered and pursued in the context of CAM. But that technology is something the Alliance is contributing via Further. We're deeply grateful to Further and our partners within Further for their extraordinary work on this very cool technology. So to speak a little bit about partner organization collaboration. There are two key phases to our collaboration with partner organizations. The first is to co-develop a pilot roadmap, and the second is to implement that pilot roadmap. So I'll ask you to go to the next slide, please, Jen. So when I say pilot roadmap, I really mean detailed plans for testing the technology I just outlined, other technologies that are brought to the table by partner organizations, and making sure that the detailed project plans meet the needs of participants. So we've sort of designed this project at a high level, but what we really want is to co-develop this project with partners so that we can directly embed local needs and strategic goals into the project. So I know, all the Tri-Council eligible institutions have created their institutional RDM strategies. Are there gaps? Are there opportunities? Are there goals that you've identified as an institution that can be met, or that we can contribute to helping you meet in the context of this project? Developing the roadmap together gives us an opportunity to hard code that into the project. So this is an opportunity for partners to step up and not just participate in the pilot testing with Further, but to really design a role for them that meets their needs, that meets their researchers' needs, where we can accommodate potential gaps or potential risks that need mitigating, and directly embed those strategic goals to maximize and leverage the opportunity to benefit the institution as much as possible. So this is really giving an opportunity for partner organizations to become co-authors of the project, and to create a pilot plan that really meets their needs. And of course, a great opportunity for for institutions or other project partners to put up their hands and say they want to volunteer for a leadership role in an area of interest. So I mentioned earlier, I know that a lot of our AVs have been updating their documentation and really sort of getting folks up to speed on contemporary practices around future unspecified use of data. If you want to show off, if you think you've got a solution that's scalable and so on, fantastic. We want to support you taking a leadership role in any area of the project where you think you want to stand up and do that. So the group that will be co-developing that pilot roadmap over that year will have the opportunity to really get into the weeds on the detailed project planning, an opportunity to stand up for leadership roles or to take lead on aspects of the project where it makes sense to do so, and to really make sure that what we're implementing meets local needs and is approved by the cohort, by the group. Next slide, please, Jen. So once we have that roadmap, we're going to be implementing it. So again, there's those three key components of the project that will be outlined in the roadmap: the technology piece, the workflows piece, and the resources piece. And of course, all of these interconnect. So the workflows have to connect appropriately with the repository technologies. We need, repositories to be asking for things that can be given by researchers and their institutions, and vice versa, for there to be those alignments between what's asked and what's provided, and for those resources to be up to date, informed, and detailed about the services that are available within the ecosystem and how to use them and make sure that you're compliant in your use of them. Next slide, please, Jen. So what we're proposing, and of course, because we'll be co-developing this roadmap, this is subject to change. The group of partner organizations will have their say. They'll say that's nowhere near enough working groups, so that's too many working groups, or you need to change them to create these subcategories and so on. That's up to you folks. But what we're proposing for your consideration as a group of partner organizations are working groups really structured around those workflow areas. So that I mentioned earlier, really research ethics, privacy, contract security, support, and governance. But again, if there are groups there that are missing, if there's subgroups that need to be sort of filtered out and so on, whatever changes to that schema need to be made, we'll have ample opportunity to make that happen over the course of developing the roadmap. So again, this is just a proposal from us, subject to your approval as partner organizations. And ultimately, we will also be creating a final report on this pilot project with recommendations for future work. Next slide, please. So that's the project as a whole. To speak a little bit now about the funded positions, we have received support to co-fund 2 positions related to this initiative. The first is a controlled data access engagement specialist, and the second is a services specialist. Next slide, please. So the proposed role for the engagement specialist is really around supporting the participation of the partner organizations as a whole. So making sure that they can engage productively and effectively with co-developing the roadmap and then ultimately implementing the roadmap. Next slide, please. The services specialist will be working more closely with the data repositories and service providers involved in the project. So making sure that those folks that are actively stewarding the data, are able to do so in the context of what's been designed in the pilot roadmap, and then ultimately really supporting the implementation, the testing of those technologies during the implementation of the roadmap. And I believe that's it for me. So I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Jen. Thank you.
Victoria, thank you so much for giving us a sense of the project itself. I'm going to move on now to discussing the process by which you can get involved with the call. So this slide includes a screenshot to the Alliance's participation and funding call page. This is your core source where all essential information can be found. On this page, we have linked to a participation and funding call guide. This contains all of the core material to help support your application. This includes the full application, the full list of application questions, so offline work is possible. The webpage also contains an FAQ, which, depending on the questions we receive, will be updated periodically. Please share this information with your institution and consider notifying your institution of your interest in applying. This webpage also contains the link to begin your online application. We are using one application link for both the participation and the funding call. Okay. So the guide I mentioned contains the full scope of information on timelines, but it is important that these are clear for all of us. The next major timeline that we need to be aware of is the deadline to submit questions. So there is one email address that is shared comprehensively and will be shared later in this presentation, by which you can submit questions to. Questions that are received by noon Eastern Time on August 8th, 2023 will receive a very timely response, and you are encouraged to begin your application and reach out with questions early on. Please do look to the participation and funding guide to help guide your thinking along. The next major deadline is the deadline to submit an application. And this is for both the call for participation and the call for the funding opportunity. This deadline is August 11th, 2023, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. After that intake date, we at the Alliance will begin an adjudication period and process, and notice of award will follow after that. Okay. So there are eligibility criteria for both the call for participation and the funding opportunity. You might be asking yourself, how do I know if I can be involved? So first off, as I'm going to mention likely again and again, please refer to that participation and funding call guide. It does contain complete information on the eligibility requirements. And also please be aware of which eligibility is for which aspect of the call. So to participate as a partner organization, the applying institution must fall into one of the following groups. Eligible organizations include Canadian universities, post-secondary colleges, educational institutions, hospitals that adhere to the funding and research qualification noted. Nonprofit organizations in Canada that adhere to the research qualification noted. Institutions or nonprofit organizations situated in Canada who support Canada's DRI ecosystem. Canadian data repositories. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation organizations, communities, collectives, or governments. Again, the full details are in the guide. Okay. So that previous slide focused on partner organization eligibility. If you are interested in applying to the funding opportunity, organizations must meet the following 3 criteria in full. This includes be Canadian universities, post-secondary colleges, educational institutions, hospitals that adhere to the funding and research qualification, be a Tri-Council eligible institution, and be a partner organization for the CAM initiative. As I will be mentioning, there is one application process. So if you are applying for funding, you will automatically be applying as a partner organization. Okay. You might also be wondering what the funding envelope looks like for CAM and for proposals specifically to the funding opportunity. The funding window, first off, is for 2 fiscal years ending March 31, 2025. The total budget envelope is $400,000 Canadian, with the Alliance funding 60%. That is up to $240,000 for 2 positions for 2 fiscal years. There is a distinct cost match requirement of 40% for this funding opportunity. That is up to $160,000 total. This includes up to $40,000 per year for 1 position, or up to $80,000 per year for 2 positions. Funding is specifically to support up to 60% of the salaries and benefits of up to 2 positions, and all other expenses are ineligible. Okay. So we've talked a bit about access to the website, various links on the website. So what does this application process look like for the call for participation as a partner organization and the call for proposals for the funding opportunity? First off, applications can only be submitted using the online application. There is one application link for both the call for partner organizations and the call for the funding opportunity. Applications will be accepted in both official languages, English and French, and that one link will provide access to the application in both languages. If you have concerns for accessibility within the application, these will be accommodated, so please contact us. All applications must be signed by an authorized representative of the institution. That means somebody with signing authority. Team applications are not permitted for this initiative, so they must originate from one organization. By submitting an application for consideration, the applicant and their organization will be acknowledging that the terms and conditions outlined in the terms of reference and the Alliance funding agreement are non-negotiable post-award. We have provided draft copies of both of these documents in the funding call guide, so you can see those in advance. And just as a reminder, the deadline for submitting the application is August 11th, 2023, 8 p.m. Eastern. Adjudication. All applications that are received through the online portal will go through a review process. What that process looks like depends on what the application is for. So, all applications for participation as a partner organization and applications for the funding opportunity will go through an assessment for eligibility, and this is conducted by the Alliance. Applications that are for the funding opportunity go through a second stage of adjudication. This is a competitive review process that uses a merit review committee. The Alliance bases its funding decisions on recommendations of merit review committees and of the funds available. So this adjudication using a merit review committee consists of individual review and scoring of applications, consensus review, and then a ranking of the consensus scoring, a ranking of the scoring that takes into account the previous two reviews. Merit review committee members may consist of national and international subject matter experts, and participants in the review process, if not in a conflict of interest, real or perceived, are asked to evaluate the application based on the evaluation criteria. This evaluation criteria has been provided as the evaluation scorecard in the funding call guide. This document includes the criteria and the scoring scheme that will be taken forward through this adjudication process. Okay. Before we open the floor to Q&A, we do have a routing system for questions from the community. So if applicants or potential applicants have any questions regarding the call at all, or the project, as they think about their applications, as they prepare them, they must communicate directly with the Alliance in advance of the deadlines that have been discussed. The email address is here on the slide, funding-subvention@alliancecan.ca. This email address will be easy to find. It is in many other places. So please use it. Please contact us. Also, please remember to review the funding call guide and the FAQ.